Barron Trump poses as a homeless man to test the police. Their reaction will shock you. The wind was sharp against Barron's face as he pulled the hood of his tattered sweatshirt lower, blending into the shadows of a cold New York City street. He adjusted the old duffel bag over his shoulder, stuffing his hands into the worn-out pockets of a jacket he had borrowed from a real homeless man earlier that day. Tonight, he was one of them. No guards, no luxury, no protection. Just a young man experiencing the raw, unforgiving reality of being homeless in America. For weeks, Barron had been hearing whispers, stories of police mistreating the homeless, harassing them, pushing them out of sight like they were nothing more than trash. Now, he wanted to see it for himself. He had barely been sitting on the sidewalk for 10 minutes when he saw it happen. Across the street, 2 officers loomed over an elderly homeless man. "Get out of here," one of them barked. The old man held up his hands, trembling. "I'm not bothering anyone. Did I ask?" The cop kicked the man's few belongings into the gutter. "Move it." Barron's jaw tightened. The elderly man scrambled to his feet, gathering what little he had left. The officers watched, laughing as he hobbled away. Barron's hands clenched into fists. And then, they turned toward him. One officer, a burly man with a buzz cut and a badge that barely shone under the dim streetlights, smirked. "You too, hoodie boy," he called. "Move along." Barron stayed silent. The officer's smirk faded. "Did you not hear me?" Barron looked up, his expression empty. "I heard you." The second officer stepped forward aggressively. "Then get the hell out of here before I make you." Barron didn't move. And that's when things escalated. The first officer grabbed him by the front of his hoodie, yanking him up. "You deaf kid?" I said. But as he pulled, the hood slipped back. "Guess." The officers froze. The streetlights illuminated his face. And in that moment, they knew. They had just manhandled Barron Trump. And the entire world was about to find out. The moment Barron's hood slipped off, everything changed. The officers who had been so aggressive just seconds before stiffened, their faces draining of color. Barron met their stunned expressions with a calm, unwavering gaze. "You have something to say now?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp as a knife. The second officer, the one who had shoved him, stumbled back as if burned. He exchanged a panicked look with his partner. "Sir, we didn't realize." Barron lifted a hand, cutting him off. "Didn't realize what?" The officer swallowed hard. "We thought you were just a homeless man?" Barron finished for him. The first officer, the one with the buzz cut, shifted uncomfortably. We were just trying to keep the area safe." Barron tilted his head. "Safe from who?" "Me." The officer opened his mouth but hesitated, realizing there was no good answer. The silence stretched painfully long. A crowd had started forming. Passers-by who had previously ignored what was happening were now stopping, phones raised, recording every second. And then, sirens. A police car pulled up, and out stepped a man in a clean, neatly pressed uniform. The chief of police. His eyes immediately locked onto Barron, and the second he recognized him, his expression shifted from curiosity to pure horror. The chief stormed forward, pushing past the 2 officers, who now looked like trapped animals. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. No one spoke. Barron folded his arms. "You tell me." The chief turned to his officers. "Someone better start talking." "No." The first officer fumbled for words. "Chief, we didn't know." "Didn't know what?" The chief snapped. "Didn't know you were harassing an innocent person? Didn't know you were abusing your power?" His voice boomed through the street. The second officer tried, desperately, to salvage the situation. "Sir, we thought he was one of the homeless." He stopped mid-sentence. Because he realized that only made it worse. The chief's jaw clenched. "So you're saying it's okay to treat someone like trash as long as they're homeless?" The 2 officers looked like they wanted to disappear. Barron's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "That's exactly what they're saying." The crowd murmured in disgust. The chief turned back to Barron, looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole. "Sir, I sincerely apologize. This is not how we train our officers." "Isn't it?" Barron interrupted. The chief flinched. "Because I've been sitting here for less than an hour, And I've already seen 2 other homeless men harassed. Barron's voice was measured, controlled, but burning with restrained fury. How many times has this happened when the cameras weren't rolling? The chief had no answer. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Then, Barron reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it up. Live streaming. Over 500,000 viewers watching in real time. The chief's face drained of color. The world had just witnessed everything. The fallout begins. News spread like wildfire. Within an hour, hashtags like #JusticeForTheHomeless and #BarronExposesCorruption were trending across social media. The video had gone viral. By the next morning, national news networks were running the footage on repeat. The mayor issued a formal statement. The 2 officers? Suspended indefinitely. And Barron? He wasn't done yet. He scheduled a press conference, standing at a podium with the entire country watching. This isn't about me, he said, looking straight into the cameras. This is about the people who suffer this treatment every single day and don't have a last name that protects them. Reporters furiously scribbled notes. I wasn't looking for trouble, Barron continued. I wanted to see what life was like for the people society ignores. And what I found was disgusting. He took a deep breath. Then he dropped the bombshell. I'm launching an investigation into law enforcement's treatment of the homeless, starting in this city, he declared. And I won't stop until real change happens. The room exploded. Questions flew from every direction, reporters shouting over one another. But Barron? He had already made his point. And there was no turning back. The days following the incident were unlike anything the city had ever seen. Barron Trump's exposure of police mistreatment toward the homeless had not only sparked outrage, it had lit a fire across the nation. The footage of his encounter with the corrupt officers had been viewed over 100 million times in just 3 days. Celebrities, activists, and even former law enforcement officials began weighing in. Some defended the officers, claiming they were just doing their jobs. But the overwhelming majority? They demanded justice. And Barron? He was just getting started. The governor's response. A press conference was called at City Hall. The governor of New York, a man known for dodging political fires rather than putting them out, was forced to address the situation. We take these allegations very seriously, the governor said, reading from a carefully worded statement. I have personally spoken with Mayor Reynolds and Chief Sampson to ensure a thorough investigation into the treatment of homeless individuals in our city. The reporters weren't satisfied. A journalist from CNN raised a hand. Governor, some are saying that this investigation is only happening because Barron Trump exposed it. Why wasn't this addressed earlier? The governor's jaw tightened. We have always had protocols in place too. Another reporter cut him off. So why did Barron Trump have to go undercover to prove what people have been saying for years? The governor shifted uncomfortably. That's exactly why we're taking action now. It was damage control. And everyone knew it. Barron takes action. But while politicians were scrambling to cover their tracks, Barron was already moving forward. He gathered civil rights lawyers, former law enforcement officials, and activists, all of them dedicated to holding corrupt officers accountable. They formed a coalition, filing lawsuits on behalf of homeless individuals who had been assaulted or unlawfully arrested in the past 5 years. And then, Barron did something no one expected. He walked back onto the streets, without cameras, without security, and began personally speaking to the homeless community. He listened to their stories. He documented their experiences. And one by one, he built a case so strong that even the highest-ranking officials couldn't ignore it. The chief of police resigns. Within a month, the fallout was undeniable. Chief Sampson, the same man who had rushed to the scene to cover up the officers' actions, resigned under pressure. The department issued a public apology. New policies were introduced, including mandatory body cameras for all officers on patrol, increased oversight of law enforcement's interactions with the homeless, a new program allowing civilians to file complaints directly to an independent review board. It was the biggest police reform the city had seen in decades. And it was all because one young man decided to expose the truth. Barron's final statement. 1 month later, Barron stood at another podium, this time in front of a crowd of thousands. He took a deep breath, looking over the sea of people, homeless individuals, activists, supporters, and even former officers who believed in change. "This wasn't about me," he said, his voice steady. "This was about justice." He looked out at Frank, the homeless man he had met on his first night undercover, now standing tall in the front row. "We proved that one voice can make a difference," Barron continued. "We showed that when people come together, real change happens." The crowd erupted into applause. And as Barron stepped away from the microphone, he knew. This fight wasn't over. But it was a damn good start. The ripple effect of Barron Trump's undercover missions stretched far beyond New York City. Within weeks, major cities across the country, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, and even Washington, D.C., began facing intense scrutiny over their treatment of homeless individuals. The Department of Justice announced a federal review into police conduct regarding the homeless population. The FBI launched multiple investigations into precincts with excessive complaints. And perhaps the most shocking? Congress called for a hearing. Barron Trump had unknowingly sparked a national movement. The congressional hearing. Cameras flashed as Barron stepped into the Grand Hall of the U.S. Capitol. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a government official. But today, he was the most important person in the room. Congresswoman Evelyn Carter, chair of the Civil Rights Committee, leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Trump, you have single-handedly brought attention to an issue that has been overlooked for decades. How did you discover what was happening?" Barron sat upright. "By listening." The room fell silent. "I didn't assume I had all the answers," Barron continued. "I went to the people affected and let them tell me their stories. The problem was never that they weren't speaking, it was that no one was listening." Senator Robert Fields, a longtime opponent of police reform, frowned. "Mr. Trump, would you say the police force as a whole is corrupt?" Barron shook his head. "No. But there is a culture of unchecked power that allows bad officers to thrive." The senator adjusted his tie. "Do you believe your approach, undercover operations and viral videos, is the right way to fix this issue?" Barron smirked. "I believe it's the only reason we're sitting here today having this conversation." The room erupted. The senator's face turned red. But he had no rebuttal. Because Barron was right. A policy shift. The hearing lasted nearly 6 hours. By the end of it, several lawmakers had signed off on a bipartisan bill that proposed federal oversight of police conduct against homeless individuals. A nationwide review of complaints filed by homeless individuals against law enforcement. Immediate funding for emergency shelters and rehabilitation programs. For the first time in decades, there was real momentum. And it had all started with one undercover mission. The final confrontation. As Barron exited the Capitol building, he was swarmed by reporters. Questions flew from all directions. "Mr. Trump, do you plan on running for office? What's next for your movement?" But then, one voice cut through the noise. Barron turned. Standing by the steps was a familiar face. Former Chief of Police Sampson. The man who had once tried to cover up the abuse now stood in front of him, looking humbled. "We need to talk," Sampson said. Barron studied him carefully. "Why?" Sampson sighed. "Because you were right. And I want to fix what I helped break." For a long moment, Barron said nothing. Then he nodded. "Let's talk." 1 year later, the world had changed. Following Barron's movement, the U.S. saw a 30% drop in police misconduct reports related to homeless individuals. New training programs were implemented nationwide. Several corrupt officers were removed from their positions. And Barron? He had launched the largest privately funded rehabilitation initiative in U.S. history. At just 23 years old, he had accomplished what generations of politicians had failed to do. And yet, when asked what he was most proud of, his answer was always the same. That people finally started listening. Because change isn't about power. It's about choosing to do what's right. And Barron Trump? He had chosen right. 1 year after Barron Trump's movement reshaped the country's treatment of the homeless, the impact was undeniable. Cities across America had adopted new policies to protect the homeless from police abuse. Shelters were now better funded, and rehabilitation programs were finally being taken seriously. But with every success came a new battle. And this time, the opposition was fighting back. The backlash begins. Barron sat in his office, reading the latest headlines. Red-circled anti-homeless legislation proposed in multiple states. Red-circled's critics accuse Barron Trump of destabilizing law enforcement. Red-circled, is Barron Trump's movement a threat to public safety? He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. This wasn't unexpected. Powerful politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and corporate executives had lost control of the system because of him. And now, they were trying to take it back. Frank, his closest advisor and the man who had once been homeless himself, walked into the room. "You saw the news?" Frank asked. Barron nodded. "They're trying to undo everything we built." Frank sighed, tossing a folder onto Barron's desk. "It's worse than you think." Barron flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. Several states, backed by wealthy corporate donors, were proposing laws that would criminalize sleeping in public spaces, make it illegal to distribute food to the homeless without permits, deny funding to shelters that refuse to cooperate with aggressive police policies. It was a direct attack on his movement. And Barron? He wasn't going to stand by and let it happen. The war against corruption. 3 weeks later, Barron stepped onto the biggest stage of his career. A massive rally had been organized, with over 100,000 supporters filling Times Square. The energy was electric. Barron took the podium, his voice steady, his conviction unshaken. "They think they can silence us," he began. "They think they can erase the progress we've made. But they are wrong." The crowd roared. "They call us a threat to public safety," Barron continued. "But I ask you, who's the real threat? The people sleeping on the streets? Or the politicians who put them there?" A deafening cheer. "They want to criminalize homelessness. We want to end it." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Barron took a deep breath, then delivered the final blow. "They've declared war on the most vulnerable people in our country," he said. "So I have just one message for them." He stepped forward, looking directly into the cameras. "We're coming for you." The turning point. Over the next few months, Barron and his coalition fought harder than ever. They launched lawsuits against cities enforcing anti-homeless laws. They partnered with business leaders and activists to fund emergency housing initiatives. And then the unthinkable happened. Several police departments broke ranks and joined Barron's movement. "We were never trained to treat the homeless like criminals," said one police chief in a viral interview. Barron Trump is doing what politicians failed to do. He's actually fixing the problem. With law enforcement now splitting sides, the opposition began to crack. And then, the ultimate challenge arrived. The presidential offer. Barron sat in a high-rise office, staring across the table at a group of powerful figures. "We need someone like you," one of them said. "You've already changed America," another added. "It's time you did it from the White House." Barron remained silent. Then finally he spoke. "I didn't get into this to be a politician." One of the men smiled. "Maybe not. But look around, Barron. You're already leading a nation." Barron glanced at Frank, who watched him carefully. "This is your choice," Frank said quietly. "But if you run, you won't just be fighting for the homeless anymore. You'll be fighting for everything." Barron looked out the window, his mind racing. A year ago, he was just a man trying to expose injustice. But the entire country was looking to him for leadership. And for the first time, he didn't know what his next move would be. Barron sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The room was filled with powerful figures, men and women who had spent their lives shaping the direction of the country. Now, they were looking at him, waiting, offering him a path that few would ever be given. The presidency. The thought alone felt surreal. He had never sought political power, never imagined himself standing behind the resolute desk, making decisions that would shape history. But here he was, standing at a crossroads where every choice would come with consequences. His mind flashed back to the streets, to the people he had met, the ones society had discarded. The woman who had lost her home after a single missed paycheck. The veteran who had fought for his country only to return and be left to rot on the sidewalks. The countless faces he had spoken to, each one carrying a story of struggle and resilience. He had fought for them, exposed the truth, forced the world to pay attention. But was that enough? Could he do more? Would stepping into politics mean gaining the power to enact lasting change, or would it drag him into the very system he had fought against? He turned his gaze toward Frank, the man who had become his closest confidant, the one person who had been through it all with him. Frank said nothing at first, simply watching, waiting for Barron to make his own decision. After a moment, he leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about you anymore," he said. "It's about all of them. The people who are counting on you, the ones who don't have a voice." Barron exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the edge of the desk. He had always believed that action spoke louder than words. He had never been one for grand speeches or empty promises. He had exposed the truth by stepping into the reality of those who suffered. But now, he was being asked to take the fight to the next level. The room remained silent as the weight of his decisions settled over them all. Finally, Barron looked up, his expression unreadable. "If I do this," he said, "I do it my way. No corporate backing, no lobbyists controlling my decisions. I'm not playing the game the way they want me to." A few of the figures exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly, others looking more hesitant. One of the older men leaned back, folding his hands together. "Then you'll be the biggest threat the establishment has ever seen," he said. Barron smirked slightly. "Good." The announcement sent shockwaves through the political world. Barron Trump, the man who had gone undercover to expose corruption, the activist who had reshaped the way the country viewed homelessness and law enforcement, was running for president. The media exploded with headlines, commentators scrambling to predict what this meant for the election. Some called him a revolutionary, a man who could shake Washington to its core. Others dismissed him as inexperienced, a political outsider who had no place in the highest office. But the people? The people who had seen what he had done, who had watched him fight for those without a voice, they believed. His first rally was unlike anything the country had seen before. There were no lavish donor dinners, no backroom meetings with billionaires. Instead, he stood in the heart of the very communities he had fought for. Thousands gathered, not just to hear him speak, but to be part of something bigger. "They said I should wait," Barron's voice rang out over the crowd. "They said I should play by the rules, work my way up, make deals with the people who have been in power for decades. But I don't take orders from the establishment. I take them from you." The crowd erupted into cheers, voices rising in a wave of energy that pulsed through the air. He had always believed in action, and now he was bringing that same mindset to his campaign. His policies were simple, direct. Housing reform, police accountability, economic opportunities for those who had been left behind. He didn't need political jargon or empty slogans. He had already proven he could get things done. But with every step forward, the opposition grew stronger. His campaign was met with resistance from all sides. The political elites saw him as a disruption, a wild card they couldn't control. The media attacked him relentlessly, twisting his words, questioning his legitimacy. Even former allies began to distance themselves, afraid of what aligning with him might cost them. But Barron didn't waver. Every attack, every smear campaign only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't here to play politics. He was here to change everything. The night of the first debate arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. His opponents, seasoned politicians with decades of experience, were ready to tear him apart. They came armed with rehearsed lines, carefully crafted attacks meant to discredit him. But Barron wasn't there to play their game. When they called him inexperienced, he reminded them that experience in Washington had led to decades of broken promises. When they accused him of being reckless, he pointed to the real-world changes he had already made. And when they tried to dismiss him, he stood his ground and made one thing clear: he wasn't going anywhere. By the time the debate ended, the polls had shifted. The political world, once convinced that he would be nothing more than a passing moment, now realized that Barron Trump was a force they couldn't ignore. He had started as an activist, a man who simply wanted to expose the truth. Now, he was on the verge of becoming the most powerful man in the country. And as he stood before a crowd of thousands, looking out at the faces of those who believed in him, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.